so I wanted to ask some of you, just raise your hands, shout it out. Why do you want to go to university someday? What would be the purpose of that? Anyone? Don't be shy. Someone.
For career.
For what?
Career.
For a career? Yeah, sure. Go to university. Good step on the way to finding a career. What's another reason? To carry out scientific research, right? That's something you absolutely have a chance to do at any university. Okay, one more. Someone give me one more reason. Why go to all the trouble to go to a university? What's the point?
Because that's what society expects from you. Now,
Society expects, right? So society expects that you better do that, right? Or what? You're not a success?
or it would be more like, oh, look at him, he's a dropout. Yeah, some like, you know, like, oh yeah, Steve Jobs dropped out, but he dropped out of Harvard. You dropped out of community college.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So, right. So, you have a chance to take the first steps toward a career, hopefully a successful career. That's one reason to go to university. You get to conduct scientific research. That's very important thing that happens at universities all over the world, right? And also, many of us end up going to university, in part at least, right, because we're aware of expectations on us, right? Our parents' expectations, our family's expectations, societal expectations. These are all really good reasons, and I'm going to give you a couple more reasons that, in my own personal experience and my experience as a journalist writing about higher education, I've come to really believe are truly important reasons to go to university. And I would say that one of them is to change your mind, right? To have your mind changed, at least in certain ways perhaps, while you're having the experience of being at a university. And so let me tell you what I mean by that. All of us will come into a university, right? And we'll have particular likes and interests, and there'll be things that maybe we're not interested in, and that we dislike, or at least we think we're not interested in them, and that we dislike them. And I would say that going to university, for me personally, was so valuable because in many ways my mind changed. I had my opinions changed several times, for better or worse, in the 4 years that I was at university. So I want to talk to you about a couple of those things and what I mean. So first and foremost, I grew up in Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., as you might have heard, there are many politicians, right? We have some famous politicians who live in Washington. And we also have many lawyers. Lawyers are everywhere in Washington, D.C. You cannot cross the street without bumping into a lawyer. They're everywhere. And growing up, I had people tell me at school, and certainly people in my family told me, that the most important thing you could do after you go to university is to go to law school and become a lawyer. And my two best friends in high school, they wanted to become a lawyer, and I didn't really know what to do, so I just decided that I would become a lawyer as well. So this is what I was thinking on my very first day of university, that this was the first step I was taking on the long road to becoming a lawyer, right? Because lawyers do important work. It's very prestigious, and I knew that many lawyers in the United States, just like anywhere in the world, they make a lot of money. And I thought, I'd like to have a big house, and I'd like to have a fancy sports car someday, and if I'm a lawyer, I'll probably be able to do that. So for maybe a year or so, I thought that's what I was going to do. When I was choosing my academic courses, I was careful to choose courses that I knew would prepare me for law school. They were the kind of courses that I would have to take and hopefully get an A in order to impress law schools, you know, 3 or 4 years later when I'd be applying to them. But then something happened along the way. I changed my mind. I changed my mind. The thing that I came into the university thinking that I would do, for sure, one day I just realized, I don't know if that's what I want to do at all. I didn't know if I wanted to become a lawyer all of a sudden. It didn't seem like the thing to do anymore. And the reason was one day I had gone down to the basement of the Student Union building at the University of Virginia, where I went to university, and in the basement of this building there was a student newspaper, and it's a daily newspaper run entirely by students. So this was an activity, this was an extracurricular activity and not an academic course that I was taking. And I signed up to write an article, and then I wrote another article, and another article, and another article. I didn't think I would like it at all. I didn't think I would like journalism at all until I actually started doing it and started interacting with other students who were doing it as well. And I look back on that and I think this is what for many of us is perhaps supposed to happen. A good thing that happened to me, and that is I came in being so certain of who I was at age 18, right? Who I was and where I was going, and how could I be wrong? And it turned out that I just hadn't experienced enough. And part of the reason, I think, that many of us go to university is to have something happen that will change the way we think about ourselves in the world and what we want to do. And a long way of saying that midway through my academic career at university, I decided I was going to be a journalist and not a lawyer. And why was that? That's kind of crazy, right? Because journalists don't really make a lot of money. You might have heard the President of the United States has called journalists the enemy of the American people. So journalists have to deal with a lot of grief. But I discovered that journalists also get to do something really remarkable, at least on good days. And for me, it was related to the second reason I would propose that you all should think about the purpose of college, or why you're going to college. And that is to be surrounded by differences, right? To learn something from all the different people who will be on almost any university campus. People from all over the world, people from very different communities with very different beliefs. And my first encounter with differences, right, was in my very own dorm room, my first year. My roommate, I came from Washington, D.C., my roommate came from the Deep South in the U.S., and he had an accent like this, and he was big and muscular, and he wore gold chains, and we had very little in common, and we kind of looked at each other like this, you know? And for weeks we didn't have much to talk about, and we would sometimes argue over music, because I brought down all my CDs. In those days we played music on compact disc. And I was playing Bob Dylan and the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, and he was playing Snoop Dogg, Dr. Dre, and Eminem, and it just sounded terrible to me. But here's the thing, we shared a room that was about 14 feet by 10 feet wide, and we were in close quarters every day, and we had to share a bathroom, and we had to help each other out with all kinds of things. And sooner or later I helped him with his essays. He struggled with writing, and he helped me with science and math, which I'm not very strong in. And slowly, these two very different people, we became good friends. And so I learned a lot from him, and I would say that in my experience, the diversity that you'll encounter on many university campuses, particularly in the US, can be scary, it can be challenging, but I do think that's one of the reasons that's really worth remembering, keeping with you when you're thinking about why I'm going to university and trying to decide which university I'm going to go to. Embrace the potential experience for being uncomfortable, because it can be at least uncomfortable to be around people with different beliefs. They might even challenge your beliefs. To be on a university campus with people from all over the world, there are going to be moments where someone says something and you're like, what? Or you don't understand someone's customs, or why they eat a certain food. But one of the wonderful things about going to university is that you get to try to figure all that out and get to learn from other people. So yes, it's important to do scientific research and to build your career and to perhaps fulfill your family's expectations and society's expectations. But also going to have your mind changed, going to be around people that you just can't really imagine them until you meet them. This is part of your educational experience too, I would say. So I mention that partly because, well, I mention it mainly because it's an important part of higher education experience. And for me personally, my fascination with the question of difference on a university campus. How do we all get along? At the time that I was at the University of Virginia as a student in the in late 1990s, there was a lot of racial tension on our university campus. There were many disagreements and sometimes some unpleasantness and some arguments and some fights between white students on the university campus and African American students on the campus. And it was my job, it was my responsibility at the newspaper to try to write, to report on what was happening, to make sense of it. And one of the challenges was that, as is so often the case in the world, nobody was right? Nobody was exactly right, nobody was wrong. It wasn't that one group of students had the right way of looking at something and the other group was wrong. Everybody was struggling to get along. And as a journalist, I was just 20 years old, but as an amateur journalist, I just became obsessed with the idea that if I did a good job, if I was thoughtful and I was clear and accurate and careful, as a journalist should be, that I could help maybe, I don't know, 5, 10, 20 readers of a given article, of a given newspaper article. I could help them maybe understand the complexity and the diversity that was surrounding us every day on a university campus. I wanted to talk about one other word. I want to talk about one word, one other theme that came out of my experience as a university student, as a young journalist, and now as an old man and a practicing professional journalist. And that word is empathy. And I was hoping could someone give me a definition of empathy? Somebody knows what empathy means. Yes?
Empathy is like, if you see the problems of others, you take it as your own.
Yes, that's a very good definition. So, putting yourself in, you maybe have this expression here, putting yourself in someone else's shoes. Empathy, a good way to think of it too, is just the ability to share and understand the challenges, the feelings, right? Most of all, the feelings or experiences of someone else. That's what I try to do as a journalist. This is what I decided was important for me to do. Not that lawyers don't do good things, but as a journalist, I was drawn to the potential for words, language, the presentation of facts, the potential for all those things to perhaps instill in other people, in other humans, some empathy for the folks I was writing about on a given day. Whatever someone was going through. Often journalists are writing about people going through challenges or struggles or there's conflict. And often it's easy to lose sight of the fact that anyone who's written about in any newspaper story is in fact a human. They're a living, breathing person. And they have emotions and feelings and drive and motivation and hopes and fears. As a journalist, I thought, what if I could just make it my career to try to capture that, to try to write empathetically, to write with empathy. So empathy is a word that I kept in mind this past April. You might have heard about students from Nepal who were promised scholarships at the University of Texas at Tyler. Have you heard about this?
And then they got, like, something happened.
Yeah. So, something happened, that's for sure. So, I'll tell you what happened. You're right, something happened. Something really outrageous happened, something terrible happened. So, the University of Texas at Tyler is a regional campus within the University of Texas system, so it's not as big or as famous as the University of Texas at Austin. Excuse me. But in the last year or so, they created, for the first time, a full ride scholarship. A scholarship that would cover the cost of everything: tuition, room and board, fees, even books. And they created this scholarship mainly to attract students from the United States, particularly students from East Texas, where the university is located. But they said that the scholarship would be open to international applicants. And word got around about this on Facebook, on Twitter, and about 100 students from your country applied. And they were basically more or less automatically admitted. And once you applied with the right qualifications, mainly it was just an SAT, a SAT score of 1350 or higher, you got accepted, and then you got this full ride scholarship. And many students from Nepal received this happy news in November, December, or January. And it wasn't until April 13th, right? April 13th was an important day in Nepal, that they got this email. 62 of them got an email from the university saying, oops, sorry, we promised more full scholarships than we could actually deliver. And those 62 students lost their scholarship, and instead they were offered a smaller scholarship of $5,000, right? So this was a very big deal throughout, this was a big story throughout the world, here in Nepal certainly, but in the United States, this was considered a scandal because US universities do all kinds of strange things, and they don't always operate completely honestly, but no one I've talked to had ever heard of a university making a mistake this terrible. And so suddenly there was this big crisis. There were 62 students, almost all of them from Nepal, who thought they had a full ride scholarship, right? A scholarship that was going to change their lives, and in many cases the lives of their families. And suddenly they had nothing. And it was the middle of April, and as you may know, right, May 1st in the United States is when many selective colleges pretty much wrap up the admissions process. May 1 is the deposit deadline by which you must decide which university you're attending in the US and send them your admission deposit and basically seal the deal to say that I will be coming in the fall. So 2 weeks before that magic date, that very important date, all these Nepali students had nowhere to go, and it wasn't clear what was going to happen to them. So as someone who writes about college admissions, I knew this would be my job to write an article, and I ended up writing 5 or 6 articles about what happened. And it was important for me to write about the news, right? To convey as best I could the information that was important. How did this mistake happen? How did a university make a mistake this bad? But I really thought my main job too was to try to convey to readers, most of whom would be reading this article from the United States, to convey to them the context and the meaning of this for all the Nepali students who were affected. Because were these rich students in Nepal? Were they wealthy students who didn't really need a full ride scholarship in order to attend US university? No. Many of them didn't have much money at all, and some of them had no money at all to spend on college, on university. And so what I tried to do off and on for a period of months was to write as empathetically as I could about what it means to be an 18 or 19-year-old Nepali student whose parents were expecting you to go to college in August, and now suddenly you have nowhere to go. And you had a handful of college advisors, of college counselors here in Nepal, in Japan, in Singapore, in Brazil, and also throughout the US, who out of the goodness of their hearts, right, volunteered to help all these Nepali students find a new university, and most importantly, a university that could offer them a big scholarship, if not a full scholarship. And honestly, it's perhaps the most dramatic and moving story that I've ever written about in 20 years as a journalist, because it took real kindness and real grit and real work on the part of these college advisors who had never met, for the most part, had never met any of these students. And so over a period of weeks and then months, nearly all of the students found a new university, most of them in the US, but also in Korea and in Qatar and in Canada. And many of them got full ride scholarships out of generosity on the part of those universities. And I was struck by how much compassion throughout the world that this crisis kind of prompted among officials in higher ed. So I tried to write empathetically, right? I asked students in your country who were waiting to find out if they would get a new scholarship. I asked them questions like, you know, what did you eat for dinner today? And some of them told me, oh, I ate dal bhat, right? But then others told me that, oh no, we ate fried chicken. My family and I ate fried chicken tonight. And I was struck by that detail because, you know what, American teenagers and families are eating every night all over the US, right? They're eating fried chicken. And I was reminded that no matter where people live, we have many things in common, right? Many Nepali students, there are many differences between them and students in the US, but there are also many similarities. And that is something I try to draw out in my reporting. And I can't really take credit for any of the good things that happened to the Nepali students because it was really up to them and their counselors. But I do know, because I've heard from them directly and through other people telling me about this, that many of the US universities that reached out and made room, offering a seat, or in some cases 2 seats, to the Nepali students who had nowhere to go, and offering them scholarships, said that in some way or another, that the way that I've written about those students, right, and trying to portray them as living, breathing, 3-dimensional people, played a role in discussions on their campuses that led to the offers of a new scholarship. And so I thought, okay, maybe I did a good job, because I tried to write empathetically about these students. They're total strangers, and I wanted people who were reading about their situation and their plight to be reminded that these were teenagers like any other teenagers throughout the world, for any way that they might have been different from teenagers that those readers might know themselves, that there were so many things that they had in common. So about that, I wanted to say one more thing that I kind of learned in college, right? Besides, maybe you go to university to have your mind changed, right? You're hoping that in some ways you'll change your mind. I don't necessarily mean, if you want to be an engineer, I'm not telling you that you should 100% plan on changing your mind in your first year at university or second year at university and just dropping your lifelong wish perhaps to be an engineer. I'm not saying that. But I am saying it can be good to be open to other subjects, to other pursuits, whether it's something you minor in. Like, I was talking to a student yesterday who wanted to major in physics, but she definitely wanted to minor in art history, right? She wanted to be open to some other kind of experience when she gets to a US university beyond just the thing that she wants to do for her career. Maybe for you it's going down to the student union building and trying your hand at writing journalism, right? Maybe it's something different, but particularly at US universities there's an opportunity, there's an expectation that beyond the research that you're doing, beyond the subject that you're majoring in, that you'll have some kind of experience that'll maybe change your mind and convince you that you really liked something that you weren't sure you liked. Or maybe it's also valuable to learn what you really don't like, but you don't know that until you try your hand at something, whether it's another major, or an elective course that you take, or some kind of extracurricular activity that you could get involved in. One more thing I've learned, I think is important because, and in some ways it relates to my experience at university. I think there's an expectation when you graduate from university that whatever it is you're doing, whatever it is you got a degree in, whatever your career is going to be, that as soon as you graduate from university, like, that's it. That's the end of the story, right? You've kind of mastered it, you've made it, you're good. And what I've learned is, as all I've ever done for 20 years is be a journalist. And for a long time I didn't try really hard to get better at it. I mean, kind of in the middle of my career, I felt like I had figured things out and that I had learned how to write an article a certain way and I knew how to do it. And then after a while of feeling like I just wasn't growing, getting better, I became very unhappy. I thought maybe I should do something else. I don't want to be a journalist anymore. And I almost left. My wife is a journalist too. Most of my friends are journalists. It would have been very hard to leave a profession that I love, but I just wasn't feeling fulfilled by it. I wasn't feeling into it. And then I remembered something a university professor told me in my second year at the university. And he told me, you're never so good that you can't get better. And I thought about that, and I took a couple days off work, and I bought a couple books about how to write better. They had been recommended to me. One was called Writing with Empathy. And I read that book, and even though I was much older than a university student, it really moved me, and it reminded me of why I got into journalism in the first place. So I don't know, I just read that book like 5 times, and that was a couple years ago. And ever since then, I felt re-energized, reinvigorated, and more focused and with more purpose. And if I hadn't read those books, I never would have been around, probably. I probably would have left journalism, and I wouldn't have been around to write these stories about these wonderful Nepali students and their struggles. And for many of them, what's now a happy ending after a very difficult crisis. And I would have missed out on what's been really the most rewarding and meaningful experience of my career. So I say that just because I guess for a long time I thought, once you reach a certain level in your career, then you're pretty much over the hill, right? You pretty much mastered it. You can just kind of go on cruise control. And I guess the lesson I've learned is that if you don't keep trying to get better and improve at what you do, you start to feel stale and stuck and kind of bored. So I would say, no matter what any of you do, there's always like room to get better, like my university professor said, and trying to get better. And by trying to get better, I ended up writing these articles about students from your country, and that brought me here to your wonderful place, and I'm really grateful for that.